Welcome back to Pain Points, where the world meets business. One half of the team here, Darius Bell, and I got along with me
Samson Jagoras.
Samson Jagoras.
And we got a guest, Justin North. I've been friends with this guy for 25 years. And I got a great story about this guy because the first time I met him, he was reading what was that author you always love to read? Big, thick.
Probably Grisham.
Yeah.
Would be my
John
guess.
Grisham?
John Grisham book. He's wearing no shirt, no shoes, just some basketball shorts. We met at football practice. And he was the first dude that kind of welcomed me into the team because I had transferred into the school. And we've been buds ever since then. We've been through some life together. So
yeah, man.
Really excited to have him here today. He's going to bring some perspective to you guys on the topics of what's been going on in the world of politics. More specifically, his crew at Gessler Blue was working on the Donald Trump case where they were trying to remove Donald Trump from the ballot here in Colorado, amongst other states. And I think you do a better job. Why don't you introduce yourself to the crew and let everybody know who you are, what you do, and why the heck that matters?
Sure. So again, like Samson said, Justin North, grew up just outside of Los Angeles, California. Went to high school, obviously, with Samson, played some football with him until he went off to bigger and better football things. And I enlisted in the Marine Corps right after high school. Went and did that as an enlisted Marine for a few years. Ended up running into a mentor who was a true blessing in my life that really pushed me towards advancing myself in my career. He pushed me to apply to the U.S. Naval Academy. Applied there, did that, ended up getting accepted, which was a shock to probably Samson and just about everybody else that knew me.
I knew this guy was actually smart.
Yeah, I've been faking it for a long time. But yeah, I got accepted to Annapolis, went out there for 4 years, studied political science with a focus in American politics and law because that's been a passion of mine for, God, as long as I can remember.
Thanks to your grandmother, Betty.
That's it.
She was a big influence in your life.
Yep, she certainly was. And she was, I don't know how much of an influence in your life she was to you, but I know you to her were oh
man, she was a gem. So when Justin was enlisted and still living in other states, his grandmother lived here in Colorado. And so we would go down there and visit with her and look after her. She was probably the most with it older person.
Yeah.
She had these 2 giant Rottweilers and a shotgun. She was like, I'm fine, son. Don't worry about me. You know,
yeah.
I'm okay. She'd be out there doing gardening and stuff.
Yeah, 70 years old with lung cancer up on a ladder, cleaning out her gutters. Yeah. It was like, Samson, can you go over there and take care of my crazy old grandma?
But yeah, so then you ended up serving after the Marine Corps because you graduated from Naval Academy as a lieutenant. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
And then you did another 10 years?
Yeah, a little bit less than 10 years. I did 6 more years after I graduated as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. Started as a lieutenant, served in 29 Palms, which is out in the desert in California. Made a 9-month deployment to Afghanistan in 2013. When I got back, served another about 3 more years. And then once I got out, I think I had 9 days off between my last day in the Marine Corps and my first day at law school. Yep. So if I can give any advice to your audience, it's if you live on a beachfront apartment in San Diego, moving your wife to South Bend, Indiana is it's a dubious choice.
Yeah. So Notre Dame Law.
Yep. So I went to Notre Dame Law School. Fortunately, my wife is an absolute gem.
Rock star.
She is. And she sugar mama me through law school, supported the family, worked the entire time, which allowed me to kind of focus internally and get my education. And then as soon as I graduated law school, we graduated in May of 2020, which was kind of right in the heart of COVID, and realized that, Colorado was where we had wanted to be and we had lined up a job out there. And then all of a sudden there was all the uncertainty that came with, life in 2020. And we thought really, really hard about whether it made sense to stay in South Bend, Indiana. And this is Samson, I don't even know if you know this, but we really, really thought, does it make sense to move? Does it make sense to do this right now? Because there was uncertainty in the job market. The cost of living in South Bend, Indiana is far lower than it is in Denver.
Everywhere.
And everywhere. And it was a hard choice, but Amy and I, my wife, we prayed about it a lot. We talked about it a lot. And we finally just decided, you know what? Nobody ever succeeds by being timid and being scared. And Colorado was what we wanted. So we went and got it, bought a house sight unseen, moved out here into a place, that was all new to us. Neither of us had ever lived here. We didn't have family here.
Right now you're looking like a G in terms of your investment. thesis, right? Because you timed it perfectly.
That could not have gone better. I mean, buying a house, what we felt like, the timing's not quite right, and it's not this, it's not that. And we bought it, and within 2 years, we got 30% equity in our home.
Yeah, and you couldn't get the same rate you got now.
No, I'm sitting at a 2 and change with a VA loan, so no money down. And it's an opportunity that you talk about the golden handcuffs, man. I'm never selling that house. But
and then then obviously when you first getting started, you popped around at a couple different law firms, and then you landed at Gessler Blue. So who is Gessler Blue? And why are they, or what are they known for? Like, what makes them unique?
Yeah, so you identified it exactly right. It is a unique law firm. I mean, one, in that it's pretty small. I mean, there's only the 3 of us. It's Gessler, Blue, and me. So you can kind of guess what the hierarchy is based on the names on the wall. But that's appropriate. So starting with Gessler, Scott Gessler, he's the former Secretary of State of Colorado. He's a longtime political operative around here, but also a very accomplished attorney. Then there's Jeff Blue, the Blue and Gessler Blue. He is on the town council in Castle Pines, Colorado. He's involved in local government, represents school boards, and a whole bunch of other small businesses. And so what makes the firm unique is kind of our strange focus of maybe 30 to 50% of our practice is on political law. And like you talked about, we represented the former president. We've represented members of the U.S. Senate, members of the U.S. Congress, members of the Colorado legislature, all sorts of political actors. And that's kind of it's a big, high profile representation portfolio. Our clients, some of them are very, very high profile, some of the most high profile people in the world. But at the same time, we also represent small businesses, entrepreneurs. And I mean, my biggest client is an electrician that started out with a 3-person shop.
Right.
And now he's at about a 70-person shop, and he's doing great. And, I'm not taking credit for that, certainly, but his business is thriving, and getting to be part of that ground up approach for small businesses and entrepreneurs while also representing some clients that are extremely high profile is just it's a really unique opportunity for somebody like me who's only a few years out of law school. But the truth is it's a unique law firm where we just do different work, and it's hard, but man, is it interesting.
So, and lots of political litigation is where you guys exist, but also on the business side. And knowing this, having worked with you guys, it's a lot of, as a business owner, hey, here's all the ways that you probably will get sued. So let's avoid that now while we're forming up your company, or while you're going through this transaction, while we're putting together your contracts and doing these kinds of things as well. So, super unique perspective. And that's why he's here today, because he brings a unique perspective. This podcast is all about where the world meets business and the ever-changing landscape of entrepreneurship. And so we got some topics to jump into today. D, if you want to kick it off, let's go.
Yeah, we do. We're happy to have you here, man. Very excited.
Glad to be here. I'm proud to finally get out here, man.
We've been working on this for a couple of months now. So today, guys, we're going to talk about socialism, the attitude towards socialism and capitalism with 18 and 29-year-olds in the country today. We're going to look at some surveys there. We're going to talk about the Trump juror selection and the criminal trial that's happening, because we got some news there, and we're definitely going to get Justin's point of view. We got 85% of high schoolers are longing for financial education, studies fine, and they are not getting it. Yeah. So what are we going to do there? We got Bishop Mari, I want to say Mari Emanuel or Mari Mar. I can't remember his name exactly. Yeah. But we all have probably seen a lot of his clips over the last 2 years.
His content's gone pretty viral.
Yeah. Well, he was attacked during a live stream. It was captured on video, but the response is even more interesting by the people of Australia, Christians in Australia, and we're going to get into that. We got Caitlin Clark's rookie contract details revealed, and she took a pay cut, to say the least. And
a strategic pay cut.
But from the standpoint of being an employer, a business owner, there's some things to think about when you're dealing with talent that has a brand and reputation and high quality skills that we're going to dig into. We got, just on the back of that, we got LIV Golf supposedly offering Rory McIlroy a nearly $1 billion deal. And this begs the conversation, are we looking at foreign nations encroaching upon American business? And just overall leadership, strategy, philosophy, we'll dig in. And then lastly, we're going to close it down with some Bitcoin and gold debate on Fox Business between Peter Schiff and Natalie Brunell.
Two of my favorite people who sit on opposite sides of the table. So I'm actually excited for that.
Yeah. So let me kick this off with the Market Watch article here. So Market Watch opinion piece says, corporations have broken capitalism. Here's how to fix it. Ultimately, the crux of this article, written by Hunter Hastings, was asking the question, why are young Americans so skeptical about capitalism? And pointed out in a recent survey from Pew Research, only 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds expressed a positive attitude towards capitalism, and a greater number were positive towards socialism. As entrepreneurs, as business leaders, us and our listeners, how do we begin to sort of navigate this conversation? Why are the youth losing their way to misunderstand really what gives them the space to be successful in this nation?
I mean, I have a very specific perspective on this, which is, I think it's funny, right? So the nature of where we're at today is directly a byproduct of what's come from the federal government by way of their monetary policy, right? Inflation at all-time highs, occurring $1 trillion in debt every 90 days. We just passed another $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that'll only last us till October. Mm-hmm. And all of those things are compounding because I think everybody can attest to this, no matter what income bracket you're in, things are just generally more expensive. So the plug for socialism says, well, I want the government to step in and help me. Because look at, they spend $1 trillion every quarter to help all these other, federally funded type of things, not realizing that the same person they're asking to give them the cure is the same person who created the poison in the first place, right? But in the middle of that, somehow the media has contorted the idea that all of this is the byproduct of capitalists and entrepreneurs, when in reality, they're all just taking advantage of the monetary policy that has been created by the federal government. That's not to say that some of these corporations aren't participating in crony capitalism and they're experiencing the highest benefit because they're closest to the money. That's not to say that. But to just throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say capitalism is bad because look at Google is a really, really bad take, because 70% of the employment market and the economy is made up of small business owners, right? Not huge multi-billion-dollar organizations. That's real capitalism. And so, the generation of 18 to 29, this is all they've ever really known is cheap money practices, uber inflation, coming out of circa, call it, 2008, right? So my sister's 24. I would say she falls into that camp. She was born in 2000. She kind of lived through the 2008 crisis with my parents, who were directly impacted by that. And so coming out of the other side of that, I think that she probably has a pretty bad taste in her mouth that, oh, look, it was the bad guys with the money. Well, the banks and the Federal Reserve, which is not actually a federally funded government institution, the Federal Reserve, it's a conglomerate of banks, Federal Reserve, federal government, all working together to try to manipulate the free market to do what they wanted to do, to quote unquote have a soft landing like they're trying to do right now. And so it's just ill-educated, misguided, I would say youthful people who have no real knowledge or historical research in and around what they're even freaking talking about. Because we were talking about this before the pod. Socialism, historically, has it ever worked out?
Not once.
Exactly.
I mean, it's easy. That's the plainest, simplest answer is never, not once. It's not that it hasn't worked. It's that it can't work. Human nature just doesn't support it.
Correct. Because you end up with a small group of people who control all the power, money, and everybody has the best of intentions until they realize they can vote themselves a raise, right?
So how do business owners navigate working with a workforce that might have maybe overexposed to socialist ideas?
Yeah, I mean, as entrepreneurs, that's tough, right? Because you want to be unbiased, and there's some good talent amongst that 18 to 29-year-old pool. But I would say today, and you've heard me talk about this before, but culture fit matters more than ever. And so a lot of these people don't realize that the things that they're spewing online and the things that they're putting in their bios and whatnot are removing them from the employment pool. And I think employers are being a lot more particular and doing a lot more research about who they're bringing on before they pull that trigger. Where previously, you could get talent, money was cheap, and you could hire at will and fire at will, and it really didn't affect you. But one bad hire that turns into a fire costs you $100,000, right? So I think
as an occasional employment litigator, it can certainly cost you more than $100,000 on one bad hire.
Correct.
But I have some thoughts on that.
That's why you're here.
I guess that's true. It's not, to me, exclusively about just choosing somebody that's a fit. It's about being the leader that your organization requires to take the talent that you have, or that you find somebody with a skill set that you need and you bring them in, and maybe culturally they're not the best fit. Well, then that's your role to step into, in my view. And again, speaking on my own behalf, you're going to fill the role of what their parents should have filled. And you can educate them in a way that kind of informs them, hey, socialism has never worked. But if you just start with that as your premise and the way that you present that idea to your employee, they're going to struggle, because they're going to put up some walls, because they've been hearing it from middle-aged white dudes their entire life that, hey, capitalism is the answer, not socialism.
So you called Darius?
That's it. Exactly.
Black guy?
Well,
that's what I needed.
What I identify as?
Oh, I'm sorry for judging your race.
You don't know.
But the education role, I think, can be done in a really positive way for entrepreneurs specifically. And that's talking about, hey, look, the level of your output, how hard you work, but it's not, I guess, how hard you work is probably an ill-fitting measure. How much do you bring to the business? How much can you contribute? And watching them.
And how much risk have you actually taken on to get to this point?
And watching those people kind of learn those lessons, and you say, hey, if you become more invaluable to my company, I'm going to pay you more. And then you're not going to need to receive the exact equity that a lot of people are looking for. I'm not making the same, person A, person B, and person C. Are we all making the same salary? It's like, well, if I'm person B and I'm bringing more to the business than A and C, I want to get paid more. And when you start seeing that manifest in your bank account and in the way that you get to live your life and the way that you're valued by your organization, you see that inherently there's value in competition. And that allows you to make that shift to, hey, well, if that works in your life, and if you've seen that with your own experiences, should that maybe reflect your governmental views and views on how we should structure our society? And I think that pushes people towards capitalism without having to shove it down their throat.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. Being a great leader, because there's a misconception that like all people who own businesses are just super greedy, when in reality the average small business owner makes $65,000 a year, right? So that's just simply not true. So you can do a better job of educating them on that topic. But I think the big take is, the risk. Who's taking on the most risk? In socialism, the risk is really low. When the risk is really low, so is the reward. So is the reward, right? And also the innovation, right? Because if there's no potential, the greater the downside risk, the greater the upside potential. Socialism just flatlines all of that and says, it doesn't matter how smart you are or how great of a product you innovate or how much you create or add value to the market, your upside is always limited.
And that's what I was talking about with the human nature aspect of socialism, and why I believe it's destined to fail every time it's tried. Is the one thing that's consistent about humans is if you incentivize something, you're going to get more of it. That's just the way it works.
Incentivize mediocrity.
That's it.
More mediocrity.
If you incentivize somebody to just be a company man, say yes, put your head down at work, don't ever come up with an idea, don't ever think outside the box, don't ever take risk. You know what? You're going to have a really stable workforce. And that might be great if the government is designing every single step of the way, if they planned it exactly right. They never have. I don't believe they ever will.
Right.
But if you incentivize people to take risks, to become owners, to truly grab life by the horns, you're going to watch the innovation just fly. And I think that that's what we've seen at various times in American society.
I also think that the generation has been fooled into thinking that by getting a degree, that guarantees that they'll get a quote unquote high paying job. And I would say that was probably true 15 to 20 years ago. But now it's a commodity. Everybody has a degree. So now you're seeing more people with master's degrees. Like that's the thing that separates people. But then as an employer, you have somebody who's just been in school for the last 7-8 years, right? Versus the person who's actually out there grinding away. So I think there's a gross misconception about how successful and how much money you'll be making in your first 10 years out of school. It takes about 10 years in an industry or a sector or in the workforce to really develop the proper knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits of successful people who make high dollar amount. And so it's just a sign of the times where we're at and something that we have to navigate as employers and entrepreneurs. But on the positive, I think we're we're coming to the tail end of this. We're ushering out the old hat, which is the boomer generation that have generally led, and the new gen, the millennials who make up the largest segment of the workforce and entrepreneurship, are stepping up to the helm. And we've kind of been through this already, right? We've spent the last 20 years of our careers figuring it out and dealing with all these challenges, paying back our student loans and realizing that it's hard.
Yep.
It is really freaking hard. So,
Well, as we transition, so we're going to talk about Trump and the jury selection, but whenever anyone talks about high paying jobs, you want to know what actually goes through my head?
what's that?
Is I've logged over the last 4 years how many times I've seen from Joe Biden and the administration the term good paying jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever noticed that? They're always talking about good paying jobs. Like just watch it from now on as we get to this further media cycle with the election. Just how often the phrase good paying jobs comes out of the mouth of Joe Biden.
Interesting.
It's just something I noticed. And whenever I hear high paying jobs, it always triggers that. So I got some PTSD there or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you how disconnected from the market they actually are. Man in the high castle.
Right.
Well, and when you're going to argue that the change from, like California just made from a $15 to $20 minimum wage, and you're going to talk about that as a good paying job.
Yeah.
It's like, what a false bill of goods to sell somebody that, hey, $20 an hour is a good paying job.
Yeah. Well, in our last episode, we talked about all the 99-cent stores going out of business.
Mm-hmm.
They pay their employees like $27 an hour, but the median income for an employee at 99-cent stores was $31,000 a year. They're primarily in California. You cannot live on $31,000 a year in California. No way.
No.
That'll get you through the first quarter.
Yeah, maybe if you live on a street.
All right. Well, so the selection process of jurors in this Trump criminal trial is underway, and
It's a big deal, actually.
yeah, it's a big deal, and there's a lot you can cover. But we found a tweet that perfectly sort of positions what we're looking at today, and he says this comes from Travis in Flint on Twitter, on X. He says, day 2 of the jury selection in the Trump trial begins today, as of this Tuesday. Yesterday, 50 of the 96 prospective jurors were excused after saying they can't be impartial and give Trump a fair trial. But guess what? A majority of the ones excused were white women. Travis leaves us with, I honestly believe Trump's best chance for a fair trial is to avoid any white women in the jury pool.
That's just funny, but I don't think that's actually what's most important about this. It's the questions that were asked that are kind of unprecedented in shaping up this juror pool. And that's where we really want to get a lot of your insight on some of those questions that were asked.
Yeah.
Sure. And I think the first one to talk about is the one that, whatever that guy's name is, Travis in Flint. And not to disparage his legal analysis, I actually think he nailed it. He got the most important question right up front, which is this idea that the court is going to ask the prospective jurors, and I can get into the voir dire process and explaining how jury selection works if you like. So yeah, I guess that's probably helpful context.
Yep.
So the way it works, and many of your listeners and maybe even you guys have been called onto jury duty before. Have you guys ever had that experience?
I have. Yep.
Okay. So the way it works, and you can call me on my BS if I'm wrong here, but is they pull you into the courthouse and you sit in a big room. And first off, they just give you numbers where it's just, this is a number. It's just a cattle call. And it's like, all right, first 40 into courtroom A. And the 40 people file into courtroom A and they sit in numbered seats 1 through 40. And then you start asking questions. And then these questions, some of them are stock questions. Larimer County, where we are right now, has a set of questions where they ask jurors. But then also the attorneys in the case on both sides get a chance to propound questions, give them to the judge and say, these are the questions that we want to ask. And sometimes you can ask really direct questions. What do you do for a living? Although that's going to be on your jury questionnaire.
Right.
But when you want is to get some questions that give you a little bit more depth. And you can ask some really creative questions. A question I like to ask people is, do you shower before or after work? Because that lets you know whether they sweat for a living.
Yeah, are you a blue collar?
But you don't want to appear as if you're asking a question that might be monetary based, that might make somebody feel like, oh, you're thinking you here in your fancy suit are asking me if I work hard for a living. It's like, you're damn right I work hard for a living, and they might develop kind of an opinion about you that isn't favorable.
Right.
And so you might want to mask what you're asking by asking a more creative question. And I've found that, do you shower before or after work, I think is a telling question.
Right.
And there are several. There's an infinite number of examples. But what's important is the lawyers on the case go back and forth and help establish the questions.
Okay, so the actual 42 questions that were being asked of the potential jurors was released. And I guess from the legal standpoint, with your knowledge, how do people need to sort of think about this? Because I've seen posts that's like, you can't ask people what podcast they listen to. And my immediate reaction was to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's without understanding the context of what you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And so,
well, in order to be a juror, truthfully, right, you're trying to be as impartial as possible.
Right.
Obviously, defense wants people to be as partial to that side as the other, right, and vice versa. And so,
and I
correct
guess
me if I'm wrong.
That comes down to a kind
it.
of a fundamental requirement that people need to understand about our system, which is it is the adversarial system, which means that if Darius and Samson are the two lawyers and I'm the judge, it's my job as the judge to be the neutral, right down the middle, impartial. It is not Samson and Darius's job to do that. Not at all.
Right.
The idea is if Darius advocates for his position as hard as he can, I want jurors, if you're the prosecution, I want jurors that are going to convict. I want bloodthirsty animals who are looking to put bad guys in jail.
Right.
Samson, if you're on defense, you want the exact opposite. You want sympathetic, bleeding heart people that don't think that the justice system works and we should keep people out of incarceration all day long.
Right.
And so that's this idea that you guys will both attack this impartiality, these questions, this jury selection. You're going to attack it from both sides in a very partial way. And the structure is set up by the judge and the court and the rules of civil procedure or criminal procedure as apply here in New York. That applies the neutrality. And you guys attack that hard from either end. And that's what kind of keeps it in the middle.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I've watched a few episodes of Lincoln Lawyer, so I think I know what I'm talking about here.
No big deal.
No big deal.
I don't know what Lincoln Lawyer is.
It's a great show. But the concept being that if I notice somebody is maybe impartial partial against me, I have the option to say, hey, I'd like that person removed. I have a certain number of is it votes? Is that how you say it?
Peremptory strikes is what that's called. Is
there
where there's a certain number and it's dependent on jurisdiction or, and I don't know what it is in the New York criminal case, but say you get 5 that you're just able to strike, no cause, no explanation, I don't have to justify this, just 1, 3, 7, 9, and 11, you're out.
Yep.
The question is strategy, right? Because if you're going to seat 12 jurors, then you might end up going through 60 or 70 potential jurors to find somebody. I mean, like they said, of the 96 people that we asked, all these people
50 are out. Yeah.
And so you really, if you've only got 5 people that you can use your peremptory strikes on, you got to be real strategic and say, these are the people that I do not want. And my gut tells me that white women weren't a category that they really factored in a ton. But I don't know. I've never picked a criminal jury. I've only done civil juries.
Yeah.
So this being labeled as the sort of most exhaustive questionnaire to the person outside of the legal realm, should they be viewing this type of approach with questions negatively, or just someone trying to find the best possible juror while asking questions that you maybe just don't understand?
Yeah, I think people should have a pretty good view of this process because it is my belief, and I'm sure it's colored by the fact that I'm an attorney, but my view is that this is a fair process that does pick pretty good juries. And the reason in that is because you've got the stock questions that you ask in the jury questionnaires. When you take those seats, the 40 seats in the room, you get a piece of paper and you fill out the answer to questions. What do you do? Where do you live? What's your income? The basic, mostly just biographical data and a few demographic things. But then when you start getting into these other questions, what's your educational background? For example, high school diploma, college degree, graduate degree, et cetera, right? That's the 4th question on that list. You might think, okay, that's just biographical data, but is it really? Because you start looking at the voting patterns of people that have been to college versus the voting patterns of people that haven't. In a case that involves the former President Trump, people that haven't been to college predominantly favor the former president, whereas people that have been to college statistically don't. And so that may tell you a whole ton of information about your jurors, even though you don't see on face value what this question is asking. And that's okay.
You're saying that if people go to college, that they're more likely to be liberal and anti-Trump? Is that what you're saying?
I know I'm way out on a limb here, but
it's like if you get within 30 miles of the place, you can just feel.
Yeah.
Any college, you can just feel
the socialism. That's what you feel.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, as you have to walk with high legs so you can step over the trash in the street. But ultimately, it really is. It's a good process, and I trust it because both sides are attacking it with equal vigor. And I mean, this comes back, and I'll I'll botch this if I try to quote it, so I'll just kind of paraphrase.
Paraphrase.
In one of the Federalist Papers, and I want to say it was 76, but I could be off base on that, so please don't hold me to it. But in one of the Federalist Papers, they talk about what makes the American system work is its ambition versus ambition. It's the idea that the checks and balances and the balance of power between the branches of our government, between the executive and the legislature, isn't that the president's going to politely say, you know what, Congress, why don't you take this one? Or, Supreme Court or the judicial system, why don't you take this other one? No, it's about each of the three branches want power and will strive hard to pull power to their own branch. And it's only through the equal tension of those branches pulling on each other that it stays in the middle. And I think the judicial system and our courts are set up the same way. And I think that these are what these jury questionnaire questions get to.
That's good. That's good.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next kind of piece that we want to talk about, which isn't necessarily trending, but it's more specific to the Supreme Court victory that you guys had, specifically defending Donald Trump on the Colorado state ballot as it relates for presidency this year. There was also a couple other states that you guys were responsible or involved in. What were those states?
Real quick, can I interject real quick?
Sure.
I want to tee this up for our listeners because this is really important. As a business owner in Colorado or outside of Colorado, I think this part of the conversation is incredibly important because it's just close to home.
Sure. It's close to home, and it's also just very important to the fabric of society, constitutional republic. Those are the things that we're going to get into right now. So take some notes or save this part of the podcast. But what were some of the other states where this was taking place? I think they went after...
They went after Trump in more than 30 states, trying to take him off the ballot under the 14th Amendment. But specifically the ones that we were involved in is we were involved in Colorado, Maine, Illinois, and then kind of tangentially involved in a couple other states. But the truth is, and a huge shout out to Harmeet Dillon's law firm and Dave Warrington at Dillon Law. They're the Trump civil lawyer. They may do criminal stuff too. I don't know. But on the civil side, man, they are the masters of all of this, and they do a heck of a job. But they brought us in Colorado first, Maine second, and then Illinois.
Was Colorado the first state where they went after it?
Not the very first, but it was the first kind of well-funded, really, really aggressive approach that had a real chance of prevailing.
So for our listeners, why don't you tee it up? What was because people just read the headlines, but I'm not sure that they actually understand what was happening, what they were attempting to do. And then we can kind of navigate from there into how it all played out.
Okay. So important background context is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And genuinely, even though I'm sure I can hear the listeners rolling their eyes when I say read it, it's important because the answers are in the text itself. But if you look, it says if you've previously taken an oath to the Constitution of the United States, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you have taken an oath to the Constitution of the United States, like for instance, I took as a Marine officer to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? So I've sworn an oath to this country. If then subsequently I violate that oath and take up arms or engage in insurrection or give aid and comfort to the enemies of this country or several different things that are laid out in the amendment, then I am barred from ever taking that oath to the United States again. And that totally makes sense if you think about it, because if you've sworn allegiance to something and then broken that word, why would we trust you to take it again?
Correct.
And I think that's a totally fair reading. And frankly, that was the opening statement of our opposition in this case. I think it was misapplied to these facts, and I'll explain why. But I think that was how they framed the 14th Amendment. I think they were right, that is what it is. And so then you get into what actually happened in Colorado, and it's 14 or 7 or some number of electors, so voters basically, that said Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection on January 6th. And because of that, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment bars him from serving as president. And because he can't serve as president, he shouldn't be allowed to be on the ballot in Colorado, because the people's vote, Republicans' vote in the primary, shouldn't be for a candidate who's ultimately not eligible. That would be throwing away their vote, which wouldn't be fair, which would disenfranchise them. And thus we shouldn't put him on the ballot at all. And so they sued the Secretary of State, saying that she was not allowed to put him on the ballot.
Got it. But the truth is, so let's talk about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. When was that actually put in place, and what was the purpose of that in its original form?
Right. So 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are what's commonly known as the Reconstruction Amendments. And so those were changes made to the Constitution in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. And I think that the colloquial title, the Reconstruction Amendments, I mean, think of the word reconstruction. You're rebuilding something. And in this case, what we're rebuilding was you're rebuilding the United States. It had been torn in half, and almost exactly geographically in half. I mean, everybody knows the North and the South, right? The North won, the Union won, thank God, won the Civil War, held the country together. And the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, along with several other laws that were passed that weren't constitutional amendments, were the rules that the Southern states would have to follow to be reunified into the country, to be brought back into the fold. And so ultimately it was, what are the rules that are going to be in place that are going to guide the whole country, but especially the American South as they become part of the country again. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment speaks exactly to that, because it said if you had taken an oath, say if you were a military officer, if you had served, and really this is what I think predominantly they were talking about from some contemporary writings, was congressmen and legislators, people in the House, people in the Senate, that had taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution, served in the U.S. Senate, served in the U.S. House. The Civil War happened. They renounced their positions, went and served, most of them as either generals or legislators in the Confederacy. And then afterwards, there were many, many, many of those legislators that they're still popular politicians. An Alabama senator that was popular before the Civil War, if he survived the Civil War, there's a good chance that he's going to be politically popular after.
Right.
So those people might reelect him to the Senate. And that's what Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was about, was saying, no, you're not eligible. They can't elect you. Or if they elect you, we're just not going to seat you, because you're not going to sit in the legislature of this country as an oath breaker. Mm-hmm. We're not going to have that. And so then as we apply those facts to this case, the question is, I guess there are three questions that are important. And these are we drilled down on several of these and more in the case, but these are the ones that I think are worth talking about. One is, was the event of January 6th, the riot, everything that happened at the Capitol on January 6th, was that in fact an insurrection? If it was, and only if it was, the second question, did Donald Trump engage in that insurrection? Because engagement in insurrection is what's required under the Constitution to be held ineligible. And then the bigger, more broad, right up front question is does Section 3 of the 14th Amendment actually empower states to take a presidential candidate for federal office off the ballot? And that's, ultimately, and I'll go through the history of the case, but ultimately where the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in our favor was the idea that no, states don't have the power to just disqualify a single candidate in a single state from the ballot when they're talking about federal office.
Well, and just to interject there, mm-hmm. because if they did, that would set precedent, which would then, the same tactic would then be applied against the opposing party, the Democratic Party. And all of a sudden we'd have fractured where, more conservative states are pulling the Democratic ticket off and liberal states are pulling the conservative ticket off. And all of a sudden the people, the broader constitutional republic, is destroyed. And we have no ability to actually get our vote across or the majority vote across in a way that would allow us to move forward effectively as a country.
Right. Correct? And I think that's really it, is that this case, even though, the big headline is, Donald Trump wins at the Supreme Court, it's not about Donald Trump specifically. It's about whether or not the will of the American people expressed through the democratic process is going to be heard. And in this case, it was trying to take President Trump, former President Trump, off the ballot in one state or two states or three states. And what you're talking about is just the patchwork result. And that was something that the Supreme Court justices during oral argument really focused in on, is what are the implications of this? If we let this go, if we say, yeah, Colorado can take the former president off the ballot, what does a national election look like? What does this national election look like? But what is, imagine some future election in 20 or 30 years where there might be a presidential candidate that has, a Republican ticket and a Democrat ticket in the same state in 4 or 5 different states, and everywhere else it's fractured, it's a patchwork, and it's totally unworkable.
Correct.
And so I think that's what ultimately led the justices to making the decision that they made.
Because, and I don't know if this is a part of your research, but maybe to illustrate the point, can you talk specifically about the situation with Kamala Harris during the riots of 2020 and what she was doing, and how that would effectively, under this same ruling, mm-hmm. make her ineligible for
Sure.
future.
So yeah, and this was something that we talked about a little bit before we started recording, but, and this is just me spitballing. This isn't something that's been, determined in a court of law or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
Just
all my qualifications out of the way.
Yeah.
So Vice President Harris, when she was serving as a U.S. Senator for California. And so again, important to remember that as a senator, she'd taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, right? So now she's taken that oath. And then during the riots of 2020, specifically looking in Portland and Seattle, there was multiple attempts to burn down federal courthouses. So throwing Molotov cocktails into the building, they actually partially burnt down one courtroom, and I believe it was in Portland. Now, that under the definition of insurrection that the court adopted in the trial court. So the Trump case that I was involved in, there was 3 levels of court. It started in the Colorado trial court, then the Colorado Supreme Court, then the U.S. Supreme Court. The trial court was the first kind of court we were in front of, and we had a 5-day trial. And the court had to give we worked and argued back and forth about what the definition of insurrection should be. And the one the court ultimately ended up adopting, and again, I keep making these warnings that I'm paraphrasing, but it was that 2 or more people engaging in violence or the threat of violence to stop a core governmental function. That's the definition of an insurrection. Now, she admitted in her ruling that would mean if me and Samson decided to go out on the street and block the mailman by threatening to use violence. Hey, if you put that mail in the mailbox,
I'm gonna jack you up.
We're going to beat you up. And he's like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And it stops him from performing a core governmental function, and delivering the mail under our Constitution is a function of our government. So by that court's ruling, we've engaged in an insurrection. Now, because again, as a military officer, I took that oath to the United States and the Constitution. Now I'm barred from federal office as an insurrectionist.
Right.
So, okay. So using that framework, when these riots happened in 2020 and they burnt down a federal courthouse. So a federal courthouse, I don't think anybody could argue that that's not a core governmental function.
Yeah.
Right. The federal courts, that's one third of the branches of our government functioning, and burning it down is interrupting the functioning of that government. Now, Kamala Harris, this is when she was a sitting senator, but was also running for vice president, started to attempt to raise money through, I think, tweeting and retweeting things for the Minnesota Bail Fund, specifically saying, donate money to this group because we're going to bail these, righteous protesters out of jail. And some of that money ultimately went to bail out people that burnt down those federal courthouses. So now I could make what I believe is a compelling argument that Kamala Harris is engaged in an insurrection.
Right.
She gave aid and comfort to people that were engaging in an insurrection. She bailed them out of jail. Those people, I don't have any proof of this, but
right.
My understanding of Antifa rioters is that when they get let out of jail, they don't renounce their previous bad behavior. They get right back out on the street and go back to burning down federal courthouses. And that I believe that's what happened. I believe the evidence supports that. And so in that case, if we've got states where there's a Republican Secretary of State and a more favorable judiciary to those on the right, Kamala Harris may be barred from the ballot in 13, 14 states. Under the Colorado Supreme Court's opinion, Donald Trump could be barred from the ballot in 13 or 14 states. And all of a sudden, where are we?
Right.
We've got 16 states left that are getting to decide this election. And what happens to the vote of the people in those other states? And do they get to meaningfully participate in our democracy? And I would argue they don't.
Right. And this is why this is important. I appreciate you just giving all that color, because what I see often in the comments is people take the little snippet, right? Or the headline, and then they just latch onto it, and they don't use their whole brain to actually think through the bigger issue or both sides of the equation and what the repercussions are of that. Right. They're just like, Trump's a bad guy. It's like, well, based on what, right? And what are we actually working to solve here? Right. What we're actually working to solve here is the greater repercussion of, if we let this become precedent, then all of a sudden we fracture the entire republic. And that's a big problem. So walk us through that then. It went to Colorado trial court. And then there, did you guys win or lose?
Complicated question.
Okay.
So let me walk through it a little bit. So in September, we got served with a complaint, and Colorado has some pretty unique election code provisions. And this was actually a lawsuit brought under the election code. We have one provision of our election code. And as far as I know, we're one of very few states that have this, which is probably why Colorado was chosen by this national organization that chose to target Trump on the ballot in our state. And that was, if we have information that the Secretary of State is about to violate the election code, we can have a court step in and stop her from doing that. And so that was what they sued on that basis, to say the Secretary of State is about to put former President Trump on the ballot. That would be wrongful under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So the court has a right to step in and stop it. So in an extremely truncated timeline, because anything under in election law, it goes very, very fast, because obviously elections have dates that are way sooner than most, civil trials. You're talking a year or more.
Right.
And in this case, there just wasn't that sort of time. And so I think it was September that we got the complaint, and we were in court at the very end of October, which is,
Crazy.
light speed.
Yeah, I mean, in a typical civil lawsuit, it's like you have 30 days to just respond.
Right. Yeah, and we were in 45 days we were in court for a 5-day trial.
Yeah, correct.
And so you asked whether we won or lost. I'm going to say we won because ultimately the judge ruled that Trump should stay on the ballot.
Interesting.
But we still appealed huge portions of that ruling, but so did the other side. Both sides appealed, and saying, because what the court in the Colorado trial court said is, the court wasn't convinced that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to states and the president, and maybe states don't have the power to throw the president off the ballot. But then that judge went on to say, for about 100 pages in her 115-page opinion, about how Donald Trump, January 6th was an insurrection. Donald Trump did engage in the insurrection. In fact, he caused it. And she found all these things that I don't believe, A, were supported by the facts, and I don't believe, B, that she had the authority to make that finding.
Right.
Because her initial finding that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the president should have, in my view, been the end of the questioning. If it doesn't apply, it doesn't apply. We don't need to dive into the rest of the stuff, the rest of this information that doesn't ultimately inform the ultimate opinion that she reached. That's called dicta, and it's just not, in this case, I don't believe that they should have been included,
right?
But it was. And so because it's an election code case, the appeal skips the Colorado Court of Appeals and goes right to the Colorado Supreme Court. Because again, we're talking about trying to operate fast. And so we want to get a final resolution of this question. So about a month later, we took it to the Colorado Supreme Court, the side of former President Trump arguing that the trial court was wrong to call it an insurrection, wrong to say that President Trump engaged in it, and the other side saying the judge was wrong to say that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the president. And so at the appellate court level, rather than doing, I guess at the trial court level, the first one, the 5-day trial, we're putting on witnesses, congressmen, senators, people taking the stand, questioning them about the events of January 6th. We had sociologists and professors and historians and really developing the evidentiary record. Once the trial is over, that evidentiary record is set in stone, and that's what you're just operating off that set of facts.
Got it.
And then all the other further discussion at any appellate level is just about how the law applies to those facts. And so now we're in front of the Colorado Supreme Court, and we have what's called oral argument. And so you're in front of all of the justices of the Colorado Supreme Court, and they're asking you questions. You start with an oral presentation, and you got, I think it was half an hour, or maybe it was an hour. No, it was half an hour. It's half an hour at the Colorado Supreme Court. And the plaintiff's side, so the side of the electors, they put on their presentation. The justices asked them questions. And then, my boss, Scott Gessler, got up, gave his presentation. And really you talk for maybe a minute and a half before the justices just start jumping on you and saying, well, what about this? What about that? And man, it just from a lawyer's perspective, it was so cool getting to see that. And just so interesting watching people that are extremely intelligent ask really incisive questions after having spent, probably the entire month preceding the hearing, just reading, not just the stuff that the lawyers are writing, but people are weighing in with amicus briefs, a friend of the court. And so a lot of times you have professors that are writing in that might be experts on the Reconstruction era amendments and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the history of it. And they're submitting these 100-page history lessons to these judges. And there's thousands and thousands of pages. And so these justices who are very brilliant and have several law clerks working for them that are at the top performing students in some of the highest ranked law schools in the country, helping them and writing summary briefs and giving them all this information. And then they get half an hour to ask you questions. And man, they put the screws to everybody. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, I bet.
And frankly, I came away saying, I feel like a pretty good lawyer. I feel like a pretty good litigator. I'm comfortable in the courtroom. I'm not ready to do an appeal.
Yeah.
It was just a recognition that I had that it was like,
Got some work to do.
wow, my boss is better than me at this. And it's like, I hope he's not listening now because he's going to never stop talking about it.
We'll send him this clip specifically.
Yeah, perfect. But I mean, truly, I watched that happen and said, wow, I've got some growing to do in this department. But I just came away with thinking how cool it was. But anyways, the Colorado Supreme Court ended up finding for the other side 100%. They said January 6th was an insurrection. Donald Trump did engage in it. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does apply to the president. And in fact, the Secretary of State of Colorado is not allowed to put President Trump on the ballot. Case closed, everything's done.
Wow.
And so we appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court. And one of the things that's interesting that not everybody knows is that the U.S. Supreme Court is a court of what's called limited jurisdiction, meaning that it means several things, but what matters here is that they don't have to take the case. You first ask them to take the case. You present, here are the issues and here's why it's important. And I think this case, it's never a slam dunk that they're going to take it, but everybody that I talked to with far more experience than I have said they have to take this case.
Yeah.
Because it's going to create the exact patchwork of results if they don't, that we talked about. And so we asked the Supreme Court to take the case. They agreed to. The Dillon Law folks that were running the entire Trump representation made the decision, and I think it was exactly right. They hired a guy named Jonathan Mitchell. He's a Supreme Court oral advocate. That's what he does for a living. He's the former Solicitor General of Texas. I mean, he's an extremely qualified litigator. And this is his whole job, is to stand in front of the United States Supreme Court and the 9 justices and make oral argument. And so he's
a G.
Dude, it is a really high pressure way to practice law.
Yeah.
And he practices by himself. That was the craziest thing. It's like no paralegal, no staff. It's just him. He's like, give me all the information. And it's like, man, he went into the lab and came out with the exact right answer and presented it in a really calm and collected way. And made the explanation to the court very much of like what we were talking about, is saying that, justices, you may be in favor of President Trump, former President Trump, or you may not be. But ultimately, it's not about former President Trump. This is about the American system of government and how we're going to handle elections, but ultimately who decides? Who decides who gets to represent us? And the court said unanimously, and that's important, and I'll get back to it a little bit, but the court unanimously said that's the American people that get to decide and not one single state. And where I think that that's important, and I asked Samson when we were prepping for this podcast, how do I tie this to entrepreneurs? And I'd been kind of thinking about how I was going to do that and whether it was even important to do it or not. But in hearing you guys talk just as we started recording, where I think that this does directly impact entrepreneurs specifically, it's predictability. It's entrepreneurs can operate so much more effectively if they know what's happening in the greater landscape of this country.
Right.
And if there's going to be this crazy patchwork of election results, we're going to have no way to forecast elections. And right now you see, the stock market's reacting to polls on a daily basis, and you're watching things. We're going to talk crypto and gold and all of that.
Right.
Those markets adjust based on polling in the presidential race because the economists and the people that are involved in that decision-making are making decisions and forecasting. Okay, right now it looks like candidate A is likely to win the election. This is candidate A's monetary policy. This is how we think it'll affect the outcome of the next 4 years. And they set the markets based on that. If we lose that predictability, it's just one more factor that's unknowable for entrepreneurs when they're already operating in a space where there are so many questions they don't have the answer to.
That's good.
100%. Yeah. And it gives you some confidence knowing that 3 of those Supreme Court justices are, openly, and knowing everybody knows that they're very liberal, and being able to put your, political ideologies aside and say, hey, forget that. Let's just talk about the American people as a whole, which is incredibly, incredibly important, comforting. And I think it was a huge victory for just us as a nation.
Honorable.
Yeah. Right. To see that actually played out, which, didn't get cast that way in the media, right? It was like, well, those 3 justices.
They ruined democracy.
Yeah. Those 3 liberals, get them out. They're no longer allowed in our tribe,
The Constitution doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. So it's, why we wanted to bring that on today was just, it's very, very important for us to just understand with some confidence that, hey, the justice system is working. And there are people out there actually taking on these fights and these battles. One of the questions that came to me was just thinking about the level of scrutiny and stress that you guys were under. And I think as entrepreneurs, that's every single day. As our podcast has grown, like, there's grifters in the comments talking trash, they see one thing and they, but I mean, you guys, no kidding. You guys had death threats. You guys had, people slandering you. And, when you're in that type of case, you really have no recourse to be like, you can't say that about me.
Right.
You're basically just giving up that right when you step into that role. But how do you navigate that? I mean, you've been in obviously some serious situations. I think your entire resume leading up to, from playing football to,
Right.
Being on the front lines, to being in the Naval Academy, to other life issues that you've wrestled through, to going to law school and being where you're at today have set you up for that. But what are some wisdom, some mindset stuff? How do you work through that, man? Because that is intense.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something that I've honestly, I've looked to you over the years for guidance on those. I've had a lot of these conversations about like, oh crap, I'm really feeling under it. And some of the advice that you've given me that's been the most meaningful, and I think it applies here, is when you got to eat a crap sandwich, just take a big bite.
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to break it down into manageable chunks, and you just got to get after it. And that's what I love about the law. And that's what I love about these election cases, that even though they move fast, it's a contest of preparation. It's how hard are you willing to work? And I think that's ultimately true for most entrepreneurs too, is if you're willing to put the labor in and just set your pride down, set all the things that you think are important in your life and properly categorize them. And, I've got young children and a wife that I love very, very much and want to spend as much time as I can with, and finding ways to segment that is hard, but it's doable. And it just requires intense commitment. And accepting that you're just not going to sleep that much.
Yeah. Well, I remember we had a conversation and you were like, man, because of your resume and the firm that you're associated with, there were some people that were kind of trying to usher you into some government roles and functions. And you're like, I want to go build my resume. But you were wrestling with this fact that, you have young children and you didn't want to spend much time in DC. Right. And that whole place was, you just understood the repercussions of like when you step into that role and having kids. And I said something to you, which was, no matter whether you like it or not, it's going to show up at your doorstep. And we need good people to go fight that good fight and do those things. So I commend you for that, man. You always talk about me for advice, but I just look to you for what you've done, the resume you built, and how you got to where you're at, and just incredibly grateful. And on the other side of that, for entrepreneurs, like, we all have our role to play, right? And so like, we need you to step up and build businesses and navigate through this uncomfortable economy and create jobs and add value to the marketplace and do all these things that are fundamental to what it means to be an American.
That's it.
Well, guys, Justin took us through some deep waters with all of that, and we'll be swimming in that. You'll be swimming in that with us as we process that. But we're gonna shift gears over some news that came out of Sydney, Australia over the last 2 days. I don't want to call him an influencer, but I'm so quick to run to that word nowadays. But he's a bishop, Bishop Mario Emanuel Josip, I believe, an Orthodox bishop. He was attacked on a live stream. And the significance of this is because of his platform right now, his audience. But we're going to take a look at this clip. We're going to censor it on the post-production side, just because we don't want to get flagged by YT. But we're going to take a look at this, and then we're going to talk about the Christian response. We'll look at that clip. And then one of the rants that the bishop went on that really sort of catapulted him in the last year. Yeah, so that was in Sydney. And but the notable response to this that we have to talk about as we look at the cultural warfare we're in the middle of is the next clip, which is the response of Sydney residents, in particular Christian Sydney residents, came out to protest this.
Interesting.
And so I think 5,000 of them, and we want to hear what they were saying. Yeah.
Bring him out. Bring him out.
The guy who attacked the bishop. There were reports also. All right, you can pause it. There were reports also that within the church that some of the people there took their own retribution on the guy. That hasn't been confirmed just yet. But what's interesting is that this collision course that these prevailing worldviews are on, where obviously Christians in the West are feeling that suppression, that opposition, that persecution, that beginning persecution, but people are starting to respond in such a way where they're saying no more, where, they were literally trying to get in there. And so it's just interesting from the landscape of business as we think about this, because what we're always talking about, you have to choose which side you're on. Yeah. Now you also have to choose how you demonstrate what side you're on, but nonetheless, there's a lot going on around us, and we kind of have to process that as leaders.
Yeah, I think people specifically Christians in the West, or the people that live on American soil, are so naive. Like, they genuinely think that the people that are coming to this country have the same shared core values of, like, you don't pull a knife out and stab somebody because they don't believe your religion, right? They've never experienced what it's like to be in the middle of, Ramadi, Iraq, or something like that, where it's real. Every day is life or death, and they don't operate from the same playbook. Yeah. And so I think it's concerning for me as an entrepreneur, as a parent, as a father, as a concealed carry holder. I'm on edge regularly when I'm out and about in the community or going to large public places like I've never been before. And that's a sad state of affairs, but it's a sign of the times of where we're at culturally.
Right.
And keep your head on a swivel. I mean, that's don't fall asleep at the wheel. Don't think it can't happen to you. I mean, the same stuff can very easily happen to you.
The same stuff can easily happen to you. And if there's a third clip there of the viral rant, but we don't have to play the full 3 minutes of it. But when we talk about bringing our beliefs to the public square, it's these kind of positions that we have to ask ourselves: are we willing to hold publicly?
Yeah.
Because the consequences of holding them silently are growing greater by the day. So,
people of the United States of America, don't ever let any fools to come into the White House anymore. If you want to remain as humans with dignity, with respect, you need to come back to Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom America has forgotten in recent years. You have introduced laws that are in absolute and complete offense to the Almighty Jesus Christ of Nazareth. You want to remain the superpower, you want to remain glorious, you want to remain mighty and go against the Lord. You're dreaming. You are dreaming. If America does not come back to Jesus Christ of Nazareth, every law that has been passed against the Lord must be revoked, must be wiped, must be decimated, and every law introduced in honor, worship, and glory of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Otherwise, the Lord will bring America down. It is the Lord, no one else. And let me say this, whether you agree or disagree, with love and respect, when America goes, Christians are the number one will be persecuted by the next superpower, which is China. And again, I'm not talking about the Chinese people. I'm talking about the dragon, which is that government of China.
So as you can see, there's reasons why people want to hurt this man.
Yeah, he's very outspoken.
Very outspoken. And so we have to weigh those consequences as leaders. But we share that on the pod today because we can't ignore the things that are happening around us.
Well, I think a lot of our listeners listen to this podcast and they aren't speaking up. They aren't being bold about it. And inevitably, it shows up on your doorstep, whether you like it or not. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. You might as well have a chance at changing the potential outcome by speaking out about these things. Otherwise, your bed is made and you can lay in it,
right.
I also think that there's some obligations that come from that more than just the obligation to speak out for what's right. And I think about the things that God has called me to be, a husband and a father, specifically those two roles.
Yeah.
Because I am a husband to my wife and a father to my daughters, it is my job to lead our family, to guide my family, and to protect them. And so while it is also my obligation to speak out and to stand for what's right, there's an inherent obligation in that I need to be prepared to defend myself from the slings and arrows that will come for me standing out and speaking for what's right. Because you know what? If I get out and run my mouth and talk about virtue and righteousness and all of that, and I'm exactly on point, and I'm saying all the right things, and I'm glorifying God, and I'm doing what I need to do, but I can't defend myself, and the slings and arrows take me down, and then my family is left without a leader, without a husband, without a father, then I've failed. I haven't done what I need to do to be a true, to be my view of what a Christian is, but also just my view of what I need to do to be the man that I want to be.
Yeah, good.
And to me, I think that, you mentioned it with your concealed carry permit. I too, I carry almost everywhere I go. But in addition to that, it's not just about being ready to answer violence with violence. It also comes back to the leadership that we were talking about in the first segment, talking about socialism and leading your company.
Yeah.
It's being able to speak to people in a way that they're going to hear you, and whether that's to diffuse somebody who wants to attack you, or whether that's to just educate somebody so they don't any longer want to attack you. It all rolls into our roles and responsibilities as men.
Yeah. And on the note of concealed carry too, I think everybody thinks that people who conceal carry are simply doing it to defend themselves. And that's couldn't be further from the truth.
Right.
It's to be in a situation where you do not have the ability to defend the greater whole, right? Which would include my family, obviously, but right. With the bad guys, he always has the gun, right? How many good guys are there with guns, right? To step up and defend the greater society. And I think that's where we're at. We've been on this path of radical individualism and what's better for the self for the last, call it 20, 30 years. And we're moving out of that and into a time where like, hey, what's better for us as a society as a whole, right? The further away we have gone, the more liberal we have become as a country, the more ignorant we have become on topics of politics, war, economics, etc. And those are the things that make us want to embrace something like socialism, right? Because we've made our own bed, we've walked into it, and we only really care about ourselves. We don't give a crap about the greater whole. We just care about me, right? And that's the exact opposite of what this country was founded on.
Yeah. I think one more thing to add to your point of defense is I think another layer of one's ability to defend themselves and others is their character also. Because there's a story that broke a couple months ago of a couple, a wife in particular. She was involved in local government, but they were highly outspoken about things around sexualization and gender and all these different things. Well, come to find out, behind scenes, her and her husband were having a swinging type of relationship with another person, and were abusing them, right? And I think that's one aspect of our defense as well. So while you may need to develop the skills and the training and the relationships to physically be able to stop a threat, make sure your character is on point, which is one of the things I've loved about what we do, is because, I'm having to reflect on my character while we make certain statements and we do certain things, and reflect on how I'm communicating, which is an aspect of your character as well. Right. So I think that's the internal piece of the defense that you were talking about. So across the board, tightening it up as men, ladies too, but right now it's a crisis of men being underprepared and out of position for the current battle. Well, speaking of battles, in the gridiron, actually the gridiron is football. It's not basketball, right?
They caught on the court.
The hardwood,
yeah.
In the hardwood. Yeah. We're going to talk about Caitlin Clark for a little bit. Caitlin Clark was the number 1 pick in the WNBA draft last night. Not a surprise.
Yeah.
Went to the Indiana Fever. But from an entrepreneurship perspective, here's an interesting conversation. So her rookie contract is for 4 years, just under $340,000. Look at that breakdown. First year, she'll make roughly 76, 78. Second year, 85, close to 86. And then finish out the fourth year of the contract, just under $100,000. But from the entrepreneurship perspective, last year she made over $3 million as a collegiate athlete.
In sponsorship, right? NIL.
And so this makes me think about the fact that there are a lot of people building brands and influence online, and they don't all aspire to be owners of companies, but they do desire to work for organizations and leaders. But what I see when I see those numbers, I see failed leadership of the WNBA. That's what I think.
Yeah. And you're talking about her income.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they couldn't even get her above 500,000.
Right. And so the only thing holding the NBA, the WNBA, in the position is that they're the only one. Like if there was another organization that could pay significantly more to these women, these collegiate athletes, they would be destroying they would be taking that talent pool. And so I've just been reflecting on that over the last day of like a badly run organization will ultimately miss out on the best talent.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate here though. We looked at these numbers previously. The WNBA in comparison to the NBA
of course
makes what they do 60 million a year in total.
Yeah.
In comparison to the NBA, it's doing like $1 billion. So
and they're supported.
10 billion. Yeah. Okay. 10.
And they're subsidized by the NBA.
Yeah. So, I mean, I used this example before, but we were at a company where we were doing $100 million a year. Nobody was getting paid $500,000 or $1 million a year. Right. So I think it is all relative, but I do think that the WNBA needs to figure out how to, otherwise why would you go pro?
Exactly.
Right. Like if I made $3 million last year, granted, she's probably still going to get those sponsorships, right?
She will get those. Absolutely.
Let me ask an add-on question to this or I guess provide some context is, I think it's Ice Cube's 3-on-3 basketball league. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
I believe he made her a substantial 7-figure offer.
$5 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to me, there may be some intellect by the WNBA where they're getting better talent because they got Caitlin Clark and Ice Cube's organization didn't, even though he was offering her 10 times more in 1 year than she's going to make in 4 here.
Right.
So did the WNBA get more talent for less money? And is that to be looked up to as a business owner? Are the people running that business doing something right?
Well, I think
or is this talking about, not valuing your assets and how is the balance there?
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to this, but
or is Caitlin Clark playing them all and she goes, I'm gonna just go see this thing out, get some sponsorships, and then I can do whatever I want. You know? Go play for 4 years.
Well, if she lights it up on that contract,
yeah,
she's got plenty of money to make.
I mean, she certainly doesn't have anything to lose. So if she got some other deal, and she goes, this isn't everything it's cracked up to be. I'm only going to lose out on $100,000, $200,000. I think I'm good. I'll see you guys later.
Yeah,
I'm out of this contract. You guys can keep your $200,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just find it from a leadership standpoint, when you think about a lot of these collegiate athletes are taking pay cuts to accomplish their dream.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have people within the organization that aren't really celebrating these women who are elevating their game. And so all of those things don't make for greater revenue long term.
I'm going to be interested to see what sponsorships, though, she does get off the back of this.
Yeah.
She's probably going to get a lot.
Yeah. Well, I know she's got Gatorade and Nike, I believe, already. And so I saw somebody online was like, looking forward to the Caitlin Clark Subway sandwich. But
That sounds awesome.
But it's just interesting as you look at it from the standpoint of an owner of like, man, if you run your business well, you open the floodgates to have great talent, great people, make great upside financially if you just do it well and pay attention to the customer.
Yeah. And then just to bring it back to the entrepreneur again, I would just say one of the things that all of these athletes that are making bank in NIL they have in common is they all have platform.
Oh, absolutely. Brand.
They all have a brand associated with them. And so for all of you who are still just gun shy about, building a podcast.
There's a reason you looked at me when you said that. I know.
Yeah, building content. I was constantly talking to this guy about taking his knowledge to the front, right? And sharing it with the people. Being I don't want to call you political pundit, but somebody who can cross the intersection, right, of like law and politics and American ideals, I think has a lot of merit, and you're a great writer too. So, but yeah, if you're an entrepreneur and you still don't think this content thing is here to stay, man, geez Louise, I don't know what else to do to tell you, to implore you to do that.
And on the flip side, the companies that embrace their employees creating content
right
are going to benefit significantly.
Yeah.
That piece.
There's a couple people that I follow in the SMB acquisition space that have became great content creators, and they were working inside of larger organizations and like a bank. Meg's like, you just can't publish that stuff anymore. It's like, well, I'm not doing anything that's legally wrong and it's generating leads for me. Don't you want me to write more loans? Yeah, no, you can't do that. So he left, started his own platform, and literally will have tripled his income within like a year of leaving. Right. It's like, you're so stupid.
That's awesome.
Okay, so another organization who has a brand problem, the PGA.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Well, let's talk about it because one of its most notable supporters is rumored to have, and we're talking about Rory McIlroy. He's rumored to have received a nearly $850 million deal on the table from LIV Golf. Is it pronounced Live or LIV? Because I always want to call it Live.
I say Live, but I don't know if I'm right.
I think everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, check this out from Fox News. Rory McIlroy is caught up in LIV Live Golf rumors. Rory McIlroy was once one of the biggest opponents of Live Golf and a staunch supporter of the PGA Tour, and those who decided to stay with the Legacy League amidst the emergence, because over the last 2 years, many people have gone over there. Well, it appeared Monday that McIlroy's icy attitude towards Live Golf has thawed enough to be caught up in rumors about him being offered a massive deal. LIV Golf executives are rumored to have offered McIlroy about $850 million and 2% equity in the organization.
Damn.
Now, these are just rumors. British media outlet City AM reported, citing two sources. I think when we talk about this, there was an interesting tweet that I saw floating around this, and I'm going to read it to you guys. This is, it comes by way of, what is his name here? I have it pulled up. Brandon Avedikian. So check out this tweet he put out last night. If the rumors about Rory McIlroy joining LIV for $850 million are true, it is over for the PGA Tour. The government of a foreign nation will have successfully used its balance sheet to orchestrate a hostile takeover of a major United States professional sport. At $850 million, LIV is offering the third highest earning golfer in history, roughly 10x what he has earned his entire 15-year career, to leave the PGA Tour. Why would they offer such insane numbers? Because it is a foreign government that has other motives besides profit. They are trying to buy power and influence in the United States.
I don't know about that, but...
Well, yeah, I think...
Considering golf is a global sport, that's a silly ideology.
Well, it's biggest here. And I think part of his point with that is that I actually agree with him on this. I actually responded to him. I agree with him, and I can explain why in a sec, but I think the point of just that if this is true, and McIlroy does this, it is in fact a very significant indication on the future of the PGA Tour.
It's what you were saying about the WNBA
right.
versus some other come up, right? Who can figure out how to write bigger checks.
Yeah.
But I mean, I push back because we are the only country in the world that allows other countries to buy our real estate. We have the largest foreign purchase of real estate in the United States out of any other country. So if we're worried about the PGA Tour and we're not worried about that, then we got bigger problems.
Well, yeah, the conversation actually does get into that. So yeah. I didn't read that part, but the comment section actually brings up the foreign presence of nations here in our business sectors, right. Real estate and all these different things. But I think his immediate point was that it will be the end for the PGA, but it also, why is that happening? Because we have this lane open to make that happen.
Well, I think it's happening though too because of everything you said. Just like there hasn't been a better product, right?
Yes,
it happens to all these legacy companies, where they're a mature company, they're the top dog, and some smaller group comes up and slowly but surely takes territory. And if they get the top golfer in the world to join their platform, what do you think happens as a byproduct of that?
Right.
Oh, this is legit,
right.
And other people follow, right?
Yep.
And I think this identifies some interesting questions about kind of my world and the things that I'm passionate about, talking about politics and law and policy.
Right.
What should the policy of the U.S. government be? And I don't know the answer here. Should it be to protect a U.S. asset? The PGA Tour, I believe, is a United States owned company that hosts golf tournaments all over the world and employs golfers from around the world, but it's an American company and pays taxes to America, or to the United States. I shouldn't call it America. Is it in our government's best interest, and is it the will of the people that the government protect that market so that it can continue to feed money into the system? Or are we a true capitalist country where it's like, hey, if they're going to be able to pay more, they're going to be able to attract higher talent. Let's get the hell out of the way and let's let it work. And I think that I don't have a good answer for that. My personal view is that I want our government protecting and benefiting American people. And I'm much less worried about foreigners than I am Americans. And
I would agree with you. I just don't know how much of an economic, we'll talk at job creation impact,
Right.
the PGA Tour has for, like it's an elitist sport. Let's just put it that way.
oh,
right?
totally.
So again, like the role of a government, in a capitalistic society, the government relies on the people to do two things: create jobs and provide housing. And if you do that, you receive the maximum benefits of the tax code.
Okay.
So in this particular case, that's like entertainment. Like to me, that's up there with like movies. I really like your economic impact, truthfully, is not nearly as great as let's go add, a couple more $1 billion to the SBA fund, right? Let's go raise the minimum amount that the SBA will use to fund acquisitions to 10 million from 5 million. Let's do things that actually tackle the 70% of the economy. And, the guys at the top of the PGA, like, tough shit. Like, you should have built a better product. That's how I feel about it. God bless America.
Well, I think you said something that I think is actually why I agree with them, because, you pointed out how this is more entertainment. If you look at what the Saudis have begun to do in the realm of sports, music, arts, film in the United States, UFC's going over there, boxing's over there. They're bringing film stars over there for their own award shows. That's part of why I think his positioning of a potential more nefarious intention outside of the business side is a valid one, because you're seeing the expansion of this Eastern worldview and Islam encroaching upon the West. And you even see it across politics, right? We've seen how many Western nations have been heavily influenced now by Islam, sort of infiltrating, for lack of a better word. So I think obviously there's the monetary benefit, but I think that's where I give credence to like some of the spiritual, cultural, contesting issues that need to be considered.
Yeah, I just don't think that, if you actually look what's happening, the United States is actually removing itself from the global economy. So the real things that actually drive the economy, that actually will make America great again, like bringing manufacturing back stateside, like we have, more navigable waterways, more farmland. We are now a net producer of oil and gas. We will become an exporter. Those are actually the things. And in the grand scheme of the overarching economy and our our total GDP, the PGA Tour will be a drop in the bucket.
For sure.
And I also just think that culturally it's rough right now because we're coming to the tail end of this 100-year cycle. But on the other side of that, there's pros and cons to capitalism, right? So the con is people go, hey, we don't actually like that you're not American based, and we're not going to watch your stuff, and we're not going to participate in. Yeah. So I'm sure that golfer, I can't even remember his name right now.
Rory McIlroy.
Yeah. I mean, I bet he's potentially, if he's smart, he's not an idiot. He's surrounded by people that are like, hey, this is a brand play. Yeah. So, if you go over there,
it's also an integrity play.
You might not be able to go back.
He came out really hard against LIV or Live, and specifically against the Saudi ownership. And now, and granted, that article only said that he was offered $850, not that he was considering taking it.
Correct.
And so I, draw a distinction there. But if he does take it, what are the professional and personal implications of coming out hard against something, and then when they offer you a big enough check, it's like all of a sudden I'm going to show up in a character, take Donald Trump off the ballot hat if you pay me enough money, and it's like that. You take that credibility hit, and how do you recover? And does that affect your bottom line because your fans, because of your other endorsements, the other things that are going to make Caitlin Clark rich?
Correct. That's good. That's a good point. Smart. That's a great point. Well, the lesson there, the takeaway is, take care of your employees. Take care of your consumers. Don't underestimate them. You give yourself a great shot at finding success.
Yeah, and the game is infinite, man. So
don't make the mistake that the PGA did, underestimating their people and their consumers over the last 25, 30 years.
Absolutely.
Roger that. Oh, no space on the memory card. That's good. Did that one go down? Battery?
Okay,
Battery's about to run out. Oh, cool. So we're almost done.
Cool.
Cool.
This is the part of the podcast where Darius starts getting mad at us.
Yeah, I get it.
Can I turn this off for now?
When I'm at the end of my day and I'm getting close to like submitting all my court filings, is inevitably when my computer starts getting weird. And it's always like, it's like, oh, you've uploaded 8 of the 17 documents.
Okay.
My bad.
No, you're good. I appreciate the help, but it's better in color. It's very clear.
Can we just end on Bitcoin and gold?
Yeah.
One, because I had a 12, now it's 12.15.
Already.
And 2, because I think that Bitcoin content always crushes.
Yeah. It does. It's hot right now.
It's super hot. And I like Peter Schiff, but his stance on Bitcoin,
It's
I don't
crazy,
agree.
dude.
Yeah.
It's wild. Like,
Well, we'll get into that. I don't want to say why, but I know why his stance is the way it is.
What's happened to the crypto market? It crashed hard, right? In the last like week or so? Or am I off base? Because this isn't something I'm knowledgeable about.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, yeah,
it
crypto generally.
depends on crash, but like in general, Bitcoin has always had large swings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it's a real volatile.
Yeah, and it's it's subject like any other thing to the markets, right? So what happened in the last week, right?
Right.
Iran attacked Israel with drones.
you guys good? Okay. Roger that. All right. Well, let's close it down with some Bitcoin and some gold.
Bitcoin and gold. Caveat: I'm fans of both.
Yes, I am as well.
Yeah.
I guess the only question is with Justin.
I would be a fan if I owned either.
All right.
Get that gold ring on.
Yeah, that's good enough.
All right. So this clip was running across X yesterday of Natalie Brunell and Peter Schiff, 2 very trusted names in the world of personal finance right now. Incredible platforms, but they both were on Fox Business, and many are saying Brunell murdered Peter Schiff.
Well, yeah,
but
it's coming probably from the Bitcoin therapist.
yeah,
of
exactly,
course, yeah.
exactly. But nonetheless, the few minutes here, the first couple of minutes are worth a listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bitcoin is going much lower than this. If Natalie were smart, as soon as this segment is over, she would sell all of her Bitcoin. Because if she doesn't sell it now, she's going to sell it later at a much lower price.
All right. Well, them's what we call fighting words. And I think they're similar drivers for both. But let me introduce the 2. Natalie. Natalie, meet Peter. Peter, meet Natalie. All right, Natalie, some choice words for you. What would you tell Peter?
Oh, I know, Peter. And you know what? Bitcoiners don't feel the need to constantly attack gold because we're not threatened by gold. And the reason that we have this failed fiat experiment that has impoverished our nation is because of the defects of gold. The fact that it's not easily portable, it's not easily verifiable, it doesn't offer instant final global settlement. And so you know what? Centralized authorities hijacked it, they papered over it, and we have a system of leverage and rehypothecation that hurts the working class. Bitcoin is immune to all of that. It is the savings account for billions of people that we really need and can most rely on, and it offers that final global settlement that we need. And so gold is the analog version of sound money, but Bitcoin is the digital version, and that's why it's going to be the faster horse in this race.
Peter?
There's nothing sound about Bitcoin. It's losing the race right now. Take a look at your screen. Gold is up $25.
They're showing a
$26,
1-week
and
chart.
Bitcoin is getting
Come on, guys.
clobbered. There is no flaw in gold. Gold worked great for 5,000 years. The problem is the flaw is with governments. The flaw is with human beings, not with gold.
I would agree with that.
But Bitcoin is really flawed because it doesn't have any actual value. Gold is the most useful metal on the periodic table. That's why it's money. Now, it has great characteristics that make it better money than other commodities, but absent its intrinsic value, it couldn't be money. And Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. It's just a digital
Let me jump in
string
1 second.
All right,
because-
pause it there.
because
I mean,
all
where
of
does
this
gold's
is-
intrinsic value come from, though? You know what I mean? It's because people have given it value, right?
Well,
So-
let's hit the next 10, 15 seconds because
It's a
watch.
bunch of hype.
Anything could be money, right? On the island of Yap, they used to have big stone money.
You can tell he
Anything
read
could
the
be
Bitcoin
money,
standard.
if people use it as an exchange. And this is the thing.
But
All right,
that's
there you go.
because they
But here's
So to your point,
Yeah. So, I mean, to Peter Schiff's credit, the dude's incredibly sharp.
absolutely.
And he was, one of the people that was outspoken that called 2008 before it happened. He also runs a company called Euro Pacific Capital, which does 2 things: helps people buy foreign currencies and gold, right? So he obviously has a vested interest in saying that. What I think is more funny is his son is a huge Bitcoin maxi.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so, they even beef on Twitter too. So he's held this stance for a really, really long time. I think the gap comes for Peter in the fact that he just doesn't understand the revolutionary nature of the technology and how it's being used and what's being built on it. And the simple concept is this, is if you could go back to 1983 and instead of building a company on top of the internet, I told you could own a piece of the internet and everything that was built on top of it would create value for you. What would you choose? Build a company on top or own the internet?
Own the internet all day.
100%. And so that's exactly what's happening with Bitcoin is it is its own network, right? And it does have intrinsic value because by default, there is a limited amount of Bitcoins that will be ever released ever. And it is secure in the sense that it requires 90% consensus to make a change in the protocol, right? That's not how it works with the federal government.
Right.
It took a couple people at Congress to go, hey, we're going to print $1.2 more trillion. You guys in? Aye. Right.
Yeah. Janet Yellen decides we're adjusting rates. There it goes.
Right. So the whole point is anytime you have, the control of money in the hands of a few people, that's when you get these problems. And so Peter said something which is hilarious, which is the problem lies in the governments and the people. So that's never going to change.
Right.
And unfortunately, gold its utility in the economy is not very useful, though it's a great store of value. It's really hard for me to shave off a couple ounces of gold and be like, I'll give you that instead of dollars. Right. So he's actually making a case for Bitcoin when he says that about utility. Now, Bitcoin's flaw, in my opinion, currently is it is very hard to store securely. People can easily get hacked. That most people don't even understand what cold storage is, which is effectively storing your Bitcoin keys offline and locking it up and
hoping
that
nothing happens to it.
Yeah. And because let's face it, the vast majority of people are lazy and don't want to take the time to learn this new stuff.
Right.
Law of diffusion of innovation says that they probably won't adopt it. That said, you guys ever heard of the S curve? Do you know what that is?
I've heard of the term, but in terms of its application.
So the S curve, I think I put a chart in there. Yeah, this is an article. So the concept is this. There's a great book by Jeffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm. It basically says that 2.5% of every, populace are what we would call the innovators. Then you have 13.5% of the populace that are the early adopters. And then you have 34% of them that are the early majority. Then you have another 34% that are the late majority. And then you have the laggards, right? So if you're talking about it in concepts that we can all understand, laggards are the only reason those people have smartphones is because you can't buy flip phones anymore, right? The early majority, who's the first largest segment of the market, won't do something until somebody else has done it first, i.e. the early adopters. The S curve says that for however long it took for us to get 10% adoption, once we cross that threshold, we will receive 90% adoption in an equal amount of time. So it took 10 years for Bitcoin to get 10% adoption, which means in the next 10 years, even less now, we're going to see 90% adoption. Now, how that's going to take place, I don't really know. A lot of it's probably going to be coming by way of just it getting integrated in things that we use every single day, like the ability to pay with it and exchange it and store it more securely. But this is where we're at. But scroll up a little bit on this chart. So these are all S curves for different products that have been adopted in society, right? So you can see you got telephone, auto, radio, electricity, refrigerator, stoves, clothes, washers, clothes, dryers, air conditionings, etc. And it's showing you can't see the whole chart, but it's showing you relatively how long it took for these things to happen, and then what happens once they cross that threshold, how it goes exponential. Wow. And so this happens over and over and over again as new technologies make its way. Yeah. So we do this. We don't even realize that it's happening to us. And all of us sit at different stages on this adoption curve, right? There might be certain products that you adopt straight away because it aligns with your beliefs, right? There might be other products that you won't adopt because they don't align with your beliefs. I would venture to say that eventually Peter Schiff will be an adopter. He'll just be a lagger, right? So you can't necessarily look to him as the shining example of why you should adopt Bitcoin. Right. And to Natalie Brunell's point, she's saying effectively, we don't really care what gold's doing. It doesn't really matter to us, right? We're still at the beginning of the S curve, right? And we might even own some gold. We don't ultimately care about that because it has no impact on us.
Dude, that's good. That's really good.
So it's pretty interesting to see how it's all going to play out. I do think Peter Schiff is wrong, and he's gonna attack the volatility of Bitcoin over and over and over and over again
While secretly buying it.
Maybe or maybe he's proxy through his son. Right?
And this may be a deeper topic than you want to delve into, but what does government intervention into the Bitcoin markets look like? Because I don't think that they can control the production of Bitcoin, but I do think that they can control the access to the internet in a way that could stifle growth. But am I missing something?
I don't think you can, because just like give you an example, there are proxy servers out there right now where I can literally use the open bandwidth on millions of computers to change my IP address every fraction of a second to where it looks like there's millions of IPs at one time.
But doesn't that presuppose access to Wi-Fi and digital infrastructure that, say, for instance, the people in North Korea where they've totally banned the internet? It doesn't exist for them.
I know, but
so can they ever be adopters of Bitcoin, or is their government going to get to control that? And what does that look like? And again, I'm uneducated on this. I'm looking to
in that particular situation, sure, but our entire society runs on the back of the internet infrastructure right now, right?
Sure.
And the government's even working towards a CBDC, right? Centralized digital currency. And so, if you get rid of the internet, you get rid of a lot of things, online banking, you get rid of electric cars, you get rid of, a lot of other things that are pretty heavily
tax collection,
all these things that would actually set us back.
Right.
Pretty far. So I don't see that happening, but they could potentially try to ban the use of it in commerce. But here's what's unique about Bitcoin is we have our own exchange.
Right.
So we can go peer to peer.
Right.
We don't need an intermediary to make that transaction. It'd be the equivalent of, whatever us trading these soda cans,
Right. Yeah. And I guess my view is, as somebody who's genuinely uneducated on the crypto stuff, and I shouldn't be, I have every reason to be educated on it, and I should be. But the basic example that I keep coming back to is if I've got Bitcoin in an account and the internet crashes, the Bitcoin's worthless. If I have gold in a safe and the internet crashes, I still have the gold at least. And to me, that provides a level of security that makes me feel comfortable. And maybe it's just a false feeling of comfort.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
But I think that's the other thing to understand too, is that Bitcoin will still exist even if the internet went down, right? Because theoretically we could exchange by way of our phones being connected to each other, right? So you could I think the last statistic I saw is you could blow up 90% of the world and the Bitcoin network would still exist because it's using computer space and internet, right, to keep the network alive. So now this is why I'm a fan of both, right?
Sure.
It's just like having cash. It's just like, I'm not a big drinker, but I definitely stockpile some alcohol because I know that might come in handy one day, right?
Well, yeah, I might come by the house.
Yeah, exactly. So, having physical gold is still a great store of value, but to completely just negate Bitcoin and say it's dumb and stupid is, in my opinion, just ignorant. It's the same people that are up there like, this email thing will never catch on. This internet thing, it'll never catch on.
Yeah.
So both of our dads and nobody else.
Yeah, exactly. So his age is showing, right? It's just, it's his ability to understand this concept. Cause I didn't understand it. You use the word crypto. Anybody who's a Bitcoin maxi would say Bitcoin and crypto are not the same thing.
Okay.
Bitcoin is owned by the network, which means the people who own Bitcoin own the protocol, which means millions of people, right?
Sure.
Versus like something like Ethereum, which is no different than a centralized digital currency because there's a small group of people who control the protocol. And if they decide to fork, meaning change the way that consensus works on the network, then they essentially could devalue the rest of the way it used to be done, the old coins, right? Okay. And change it to the new coins, which probably generally benefits them. I'm sure they were on the right side of the trade before they made that decision, right? But it would require 90% of the Bitcoin holders to make a decision together. We can't even agree on who would be president.
No way.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we're going to get 90% of the people to agree on how we should change the network. And people have tried and it's failed time and time again. So, but you know, the internet came about in 1983. Have we ever had a global internet collapse?
Nope.
Okay. So some of those things are unfounded, right?
Sure.
They're definitely a reality we should consider. And I don't think that, you know, gold and these other things just go away entirely. But I do think that the point that Natalie Brunell is making is the current system sucks, right? The current system, the fiat current system that she said they papered over, meaning they got rid of the gold back. And now you have currency that they can just print at will. Like, why are we doing that? And that leads to a fundamental question. If the government can just print more money, why do we pay taxes?
Yeah.
Right. Because they're effectively inflating away any value that we do have. Right. So hence why it's substantially more expensive to live today than it was 1987. Sure. Right. And why it's increasingly more expensive day in and day out.
Well, dude, so we're out of time for today.
Yeah, it was a good one.
It was a great one.
I especially appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah.
Happy to be here,
people.
man. Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome.
We're going to have to bring you back.
Anytime.
This is going to need a regular occurrence here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me know how I can help. I want in.
Roger that. And guys, thanks for tuning in. We just appreciate your ears and your eyes and your time. 2 hours today, we rocked together.
Yeah,
and so the ever-changing landscape of entrepreneurship is yours for the navigating, but we're here in the journey with you. Until next time, this is Pain Points, where the world meets business. Can we get some outro music as we leave our friends here? I was hoping for the good day.
Yeah, that's right. This is a good song too.
This is good. Take care, guys. We thank you for your time.